closest friends lost his wife to dementia and cancer. I one day asked him, how did you get through it? And he told me not very well. Matter of fact, he said, I never really got through it. And he's right. We don't really get through things like that, do we? It changes us forever. But the loss put him into shock. So much so that he lost the ability to speak. He literally could not say any words at all. When he went to the florist to order flowers for the funeral, he couldn't talk. He couldn't say anything. I came across some research recently where trauma can actually shut down speech and language areas of the brain. That's what happened to him. I shared this with him, and his wife died many, many years ago, but I shared with his research with him just recently. He came back and said to me, part of me died with her. What do you say to something like that? What do you say to people who have lost a loved one? A husband who is now a widower? How do you comfort a parent who's lost a child? How do you console a child who has lost a parent? Or even in your own life? What do you say to yourself about grief, loss, and death? Words at times seem meaningless. In John chapter 11, John tells us what Jesus said in the face of death. And here I think we'll find help and support when we deal with loss and grief and death, when it enters our lives. The passage itself breaks down into 4 scenes or 4 conversations, and each one is meant to help us and support us in the midst of grief and sorrow. The first 6 verses serve as an introduction to the story. Because of the increase of hostility in Jerusalem, Jesus journeyed to Perea in John 10:39-40. While he was there, a friend of his named Lazarus became seriously ill. John begins by telling us this story. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. Now, Bethany was a small village just southeast of the slope of the Mount of Olives. It's about 2 miles from Jerusalem. And John now feels he needs to further identify who this Mary is. Verse 2, it was the Mary who anointed Jesus with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Now, this does not mean that the anointing already happened. Matter of fact, it doesn't happen until chapter 12, verse 3. And it merely implies that when John wrote this, the fact was well known among his readers. So next we're going to see that Jesus loved Lazarus in verse 3. So his sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. His name doesn't need to be said. Jesus knew it well. He was a close friend. He was a brother from a different mother. In fact, the word used for love here is phileo. It's a love in a friendship sense. It's a natural affection that we would have for each other. It's kind of like the life group love, where you have natural affections for fellow believers as you gather together. And it involves our feelings. The message itself is just a statement of fact. Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. But notice something. They did not ask him to come. Maybe because they realized that Jewish opposition was growing against them in Jerusalem. So there is no request or plea. Yet the message implies I think, a belief that Jesus could and would heal him. But Jesus didn't come. John records the reaction of Jesus in verses 4 and 5. But when Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness is not to end in death, but it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified." Jesus said the sickness is not to have death as its final result. Rather, it is for the glory of God, meaning that the Son of Man might be manifested. By raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus would demonstrate his deity and messiahship. And that's the big picture of this story, the picture of the glory of God. But it's not overshadowed, it does not overshadow Jesus' love for these sisters and Lazarus. Verse 5. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. The first response is an outward manifestation, an outward statement of the manifestation of the glory of God. But next, Jesus gives us an inward posture. He loved Lazarus and his sisters. John uses a different word here for love. The word here is use of a choice to do the best for the person loved. What it means, agape. All of us know, probably heard that word before. The sisters used the more emotional word, but Jesus loved them in doing the best in action for them, not necessarily feeling. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days longer in the place where he was. What? He stayed 2 more days. Strange thing. What's he doing? The word "so" at the front of the word verse should be "therefore." And this is the conclusion that Jesus is drawing. The result is that it gives us a very odd statement from the Lord. Because he wanted the best for him, agape, he delayed in going. Since he loved them, you would expect that the text would say he got up and immediately went, right? Instead, he remained where he was for 2 more days. Why did he do that? Well, the answer is that God's timing is perfect for accomplishing his purposes, not ours. He is sovereign over all of our lives and even over death. In this case, God's purposes was to glorify his Son, to manifest him as the Messiah, the Son of God. But also to cause his sisters and others to believe and to grow in their faith. Of course, this is what Jesus does, doesn't he? He often did the unpredictable to accomplish the incredible in our lives. He still does that today. The remainder of the story can be divided into 4 scenes or conversations, which I think will give us support and help us to deal with grief and loss in our lives. Each story has a principle that invites us to take it into our life. So the first scene, the first conversation is with the disciples. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." The Lord does not say, by the way, let's go to Bethany, which is where they were, which is within Judea. But let's go to Judea. The Judea epitomizes a hostile land of unbelief in contrast to Perea. And Jesus was setting up a test for them. Look at their response in verse 8. The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and now you want to go back there again?" In the minds of the disciples, for him to go to Judea was the surest way to commit suicide. When Jesus answered, he gives a strange response. "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks during the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks during the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." He said this, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. But I go so that I may awaken him out of the sleep. He gives a strange response. Now, what in the world is he talking about here? I think we get some help from John chapter 9, verse 4. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming and no one can work. See, when a person works during the day, they accomplish what is needed, right? While it is still light. Don't worry about me dying, he says, about the night, about death. No, I'm not dead yet. It is still time, it isn't time for me to die. In other words, the work must be done while there is still opportunity to do so. And Jesus must go and resurrect Lazarus. The disciples misunderstood the phrase, Lazarus has fallen asleep. Look at this in verse 12 and 13. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover, he'll wake up. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking about literal sleep. Disciples obviously didn't understand his metaphor. They thought only in terms of sleeping, not being dead. And of course, I think they would rather think that way, that he's just asleep so they don't have to go to Judea and face death for themselves. And Jesus clarifies this, right? So Jesus then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Now here he shows omniscience by saying this. Nobody told him Lazarus was dead, but only he was sick. The Father told him that Lazarus was dead. And he adds, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. So let us go to him. Jesus wasn't saying that he was glad that Lazarus was dead, but he was glad for the opportunity for the disciples to believe and to grow in their faith. But Thomas, doubting Thomas, has something to say. Verse 16. Therefore Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, yeah, let's go, so that we all may die with him. Thomas is the Hebrew name. Didymus is Greek, and it means twin. He had a twin brother. And may I say, he is also twin-minded. In him, the twins of doubt and faith were contending with each other for mastery, sort of like Esau and Jacob and Rebekah's womb. He seems to have combined the devotion to Jesus with a tendency to see the dark side of everything. Jesus said, let's go that you might believe. Thomas says, let's go that we might die. See, I see a bit of sarcasm in that, in his statement. He isn't expressing commitment, but cynicism. In our anxious trials, we often see our death, our end, our downfall, our failure. But the Lord sees our development, our growth, our hope. Someone said, if Thomas's attitude is any indication, the disciples' faith certainly needed strengthening. This brings us to the first principle in dealing with loss and grief. Because Jesus waits, we can know that he wants to give us something more than just relief. Jesus loved Mary and Martha sacrificially, agape. Therefore, he delayed in coming. We don't like that. It doesn't feel like love when Jesus delays, does it? Well, let's face it, we went to a doctor and he was to say to us, well, I know what's ailing you. I have a solution for your ailment right here in my drawer. Why don't you come back next week? Oh, what? You got the solution there? I'm not going away. I want it right now. I want to be healed at this moment. See, in our flesh, all pain shows God's lack of power to us, I think. when we really think about it from our own perspective. But Jesus delays because he wants to give Martha and Mary something greater. He wants to do the very best for them, agape. He wants to reveal his glory and strengthen them in their faith in him. When death enters our lives, is it possible? Is it possible that God might be wanting to do something greater in our lives? Could it be that he wants us to know that not everything needs to make sense right now? God is still working behind the scenes. Could it be that he wants to build a greater character in us in order that we might be able to comfort other people? Could it be that God wants us to know that he is a God who cares? Could it be that grief itself is a gift for our lives? And that's hard to understand. So many of us are like Thomas, right? We doubt. And you know something? It's okay. It's okay to doubt when you're confused. Yes, even as believers. Jesus doesn't point his finger at them, chide them, even though he wants so much more for them. Instead, he moves on. Now, in contrast to Thomas and the disciples, we move on to scene 2 in the conversation with Martha. So when Jesus came, verse 17, when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him. But Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, he will give you. Apparently Martha heard that Jesus was coming, but Mary did not. And we shall look at that a little bit later. At any rate, as soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him and just blurted out, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. There's no greeting, just a direct, blunt statement. Notice what she doesn't say. She doesn't say if you had, she does not say if you had come. She only says if you had been here. This is not a reproach. She's not pointing her finger at Jesus. She's not rebuking him. It's an expression of deep regret. This thought was in both the minds of the sisters during this time, as we shall see. Mary says the same thing in verse 32. But she adds an expression of confidence in Jesus' prayer to God. She believed that his prayer to God would have been answered, and I think implied to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, Jesus doesn't correct her regret or despair, but instead he gives her hope. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise on the resurrection on the last day. Jesus made a simple statement, your brother will rise from the dead. Now, you can either take it 2 ways. You can rise now or later. And Martha took it to mean later. She believed in the resurrection on the last day. And that, of course, is not what Jesus had in mind. Now, his reply is one of the most amazing statements in all of the New Testament. Memorize it. It's amazing. He said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He turns her objective doctrine into a subjective relationship. By the way, that's what he wants with all doctrine, to turn it into a relationship with him. I am the resurrection and the life. See, there's no need for him as a man of God to pray about this, although he does. He is the resurrection and the life. There is no need to look forward to the last day. He is, not will be, the resurrection and the life. He does not procure this power. This power is embodied in him. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Now he explains these two phrases, and I have a graphic that isn't going to work here because I don't have enough screen. But the first phrase, I am the resurrection, applies to those who have departed physically. The one who believes in me will live spiritually, even if he dies physically. That's Lazarus. He believed spiritually and died physically. Second part of verse 25. That's Lazarus. Now look at the chart up here, but you won't see it. On the other side of the chart, I am the resurrection on one side, and I am the life. I am the life and the life. And that is explained in verse 26. And everyone who lives, physically lives, and believes in me will never die spiritually. So verse 26 applies to those who are still alive and remain. Martha remains behind. She lives physically, but she and others will never die spiritually. There is no spiritual death for those who believe in him. There is no separation from God, even if they remain physically on earth. Lazarus, because he believed, he will live spiritually, even if he dies physically. It's an incredible statement. And that is our hope this morning as well. That Jesus Christ is the resurrection and the life for us as well. Now, he pointedly asks Martha, do you believe this? Did Jesus know that she believed it? I think what he wanted Martha to do is to express the truth and hope that she had. He wanted her to rehearse the truth that she knows for encouragement. By the way, that's very good for us too. Rehearse the truth you know for encouragement in the midst of death. That's what she does with amazing clarity. It is the high point of the Gospel of John, of all 7 I am statements, of all confessions of belief. And look at it, verse 27. She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, and he who comes into the world. Now she doesn't simply say, I believe. She makes a full statement. The word I is emphatic. She's pointing to herself. She says, I have believed you. As John at the end of his book says, he wrote this so that people might believe that Jesus is Christ, the Son of God, in chapter 20, verse 31. And Martha makes this very confession. She says that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, and God himself, the Son of God, who comes into the world. She acknowledges his pre-existence. With Thomas, Jesus gets doubt. With Martha, he gets belief and trust. This brings us to the second principle in dealing with death and loss. Because Jesus is the resurrection and the life, he has abolished death, thus gives us hope for all who despair. You know, we call this world the land of the living, but it would be more correct to call it the land of the dying. Through Jesus Christ, we know that we are on a journey, not into sunset, but into sunrise. In a most real sense, we are not on our way to death. We are on our way to life. Why? Because as Dylan Thomas said, death shall have no dominion. Take that in this morning. Death shall have no dominion. In grief and loss, we can doubt like Thomas. Also in grief and loss, we can know that he is the resurrection and the life like Martha. And now we're going to look at the third scene, the conversation with Mary. Before relating the encounter, John fills us in on some background information. When she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, "The teacher's here, and he's calling for you." When she heard this, she got up and quickly was coming to him. Now Jesus had not come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. Then the Jews who were with her, they were consoling her. And when they saw that Mary had gotten up and quickly went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep. Martha returned to the house and told Mary privately that Jesus had come and wanted to see her. Apparently she didn't know that he was there, and maybe because of the grief and confusion of the moment and the confusion of the day, it just didn't register for her. But we don't know why she didn't know. So Mary takes off for Jesus in verse 32. Therefore, when Jesus came to the place, when Mary came to the place where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." I like what Warren Wiersbe says about this. Martha was the worker. She was active. Mary was the contemplative one who sat at Jesus' feet. He points out that Mary appears 3 times in the Gospels. Each time she's at the feet of Jesus. Luke 10:39, John, this passage here, 11:32, and in 12, verse 3. He adds that she sat at his feet to listen to his word. She fell at his feet to pour out her sorrow, and she came to his feet to give him praise and worship. I love that. It's not a bad posture for all of us to have. To listen, to pour out our hearts, and to worship, praise him. When she saw him, she burst into tears. The word used here for weeping in verse 31-30 refers to a loud pain and sorrow. It means a lament, a wail, a crying out loud. Her emotion, she just blurted out in her emotion, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." The same words as Martha in verse 21. No doubt they expressed this thought with each other over the last several days. Jesus says nothing to her about that. He doesn't fix her. Instead, he's empathetic. He asks about the tomb. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit. He was troubled. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." When Jesus saw the scene, he was deeply troubled emotionally. Barclay says it means that it was such a deep emotion seized him that an involuntary groan wrenched from his heart. He added, so deeply did Jesus enter into man's sorrows that his heart was wrought with anguish. The word translated trouble means to be disturbed, to stir up. In other words, he was profoundly moved. So much so, verse 35, Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. The word weep here in this verse is different than the one that was used earlier. It means to weep and to shed tears. In other words, he didn't cry out loud like the others, but his tears trickled down his face. He could sympathize with the intensity of his friend's grief. He wept with those who weep. Verse B again says, this is the deepest verse in the Bible. His weeping reveals his humanity. As a human, he entered into our experiences. He knows how we feel. In fact, being the perfect God-man, Jesus experienced things in a deeper way than we do. His tears assured us of his sympathy. He was a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. Isaiah 53:3. He was a merciful high priest who could be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. Hebrews 4:14-16. So the Jews were saying, see how much he loved him. But some of the others were saying, could this man who opened the eyes of the man who was blind, have kept him from dying? Isn't that funny? The tears can indicate love or powerlessness. Some seeing Jesus' tears, remarked how he loved Lazarus. The love here is more the phileo love, the natural affection love. Others complained. If he healed others, why can't he have prevented this? The drift of their remark is that he was weeping because he didn't come in time to save him. And then the implication is he really couldn't. Again, Jesus doesn't address this. So Jesus again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave and a stone laid against it. The emotions are less outward than before. By this time they were at the grave, which was a cave, with a stone laid against the opening. This was not uncommon in Palestine. Having a private burial place indicated that the family was pretty financially well off. This part of the passage reveals God's deep, deep compassion. See, the Greeks believed in an isolated, passionless God. What a different picture Jesus gives to us. He showed a God whose heart is wrought with anguish for the grief of his people, for all of us too. One of the greatest things that Jesus did was to bring news that we have a God who cares. For a bereaved person, it's often what they need. They need to know that God cares. He didn't make a mistake. He isn't cruel. He isn't uncaring. But he cares deeper than we can comprehend. This brings us to the third invitation. Bring it to our lives. Because Jesus wept, we know he feels our pain and wants to strengthen us. Grief and loss, we can doubt like Thomas. We can believe like Martha, and we can weep like Jesus and Mary. Next, we'll look at the fourth conversation with the mourners. By this time, a small group of mourners were around the tomb, and Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he had been dead for 4 days. Martha spoke up, I think, being a sister. She could not bear to see her brother or allow him to be seen in that condition. I love the way that King James puts it. He stinketh. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? That statement by Jesus apparently refers to a dialogue that is not recorded. He told the disciples about the glory, but not Martha. So he must have told her. But John didn't record that. Now he doesn't say, I'll raise Lazarus. But more importantly, he says, you will see the glory of God. The crowd would have seen a miracle, but only believers will see the glory of God as it shows the true identity of Jesus Christ, the Messiah and God himself. So they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes. See that word, removed? It should be translated lifted. they lifted the stone out of the crevice of the covering. You see Jesus raising his eyes, the same word. They lifted the stone, and he raised his eyes. He lifted his eyes. One lifts to uncover death, and Jesus lifts his eyes to bring life. And he continues in prayer. He said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I knew that you always hear me. Nevertheless, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. He cried out with a loud voice. That word for cry is the only word used in the Gospel of John and nowhere else used. It's used elsewhere of a multitude shouting. It's a loud cry, perhaps a result of strong emotion, but the whole multitude heard it. Lazarus, come out! It's been suggested that if he didn't say Lazarus, he would have emptied the entire graveyard. Love that. But only Lazarus came out. The man who had died came forth, this is verse 44, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. And Jesus said to him, unbind him and let him go. I can wait to be the guy that unbinds him. He who was dead is alive. He who was sick is now well. They that were filled with doubt and regret now believe. As all events in the life of Christ, often there's a double reaction to what happened. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary saw what he had done and believed in him. But some of them went back to the Pharisees, told them the things that Jesus had done. Some saw a miracle and got the point and believed. That means they received eternal life. And if you think about it, their belief in Christ is the second miracle and the second resurrection in this passage. The others did not believe. Instead, they went and told the Pharisees. And as a result of Jesus' miracle, there was a division. And this brings us to the fourth and final principle in dealing with loss. Because Jesus walks with us, we know that he wants to shred our grave clothes. In grief, Jesus sometimes waits to give us more than relief. In grief, Jesus weeps so that we might be assured of a God who cares. And in grief, Jesus is the resurrection and the life, so that death shall not have dominion. And in grief, Jesus walks with us so that we might embrace the resurrection life. Godly pastor was informed by his physician that he only had a short time to live. So he walked home and wrote in his diary these words. I walked home from the doctor's office in deep thought about the brevity of this life. I looked across at the mountain I loved, and the river I enjoyed, and the stately trees that have always been God's poetry to my soul. Then in the evening, I looked up and saw the great sky where God was lighting his lamps. And he said, I may not see you many more times, but mountain, I will live when you are gone. River, I shall live when you cease running to the sea. Stars, I shall be alive when you have fallen from your sockets, the great downward pull of the material universe.